The Ural Mountains are a vast, untamed wilderness, where the wind howls through endless ridges and dense forests stretch for miles in every direction. In the dead of winter, temperatures plummet to lethal levels, and the snow-covered peaks become a place of solitude and danger. It was here, in February 1959, that a group of experienced hikers embarked on a trek that should have tested their endurance, but instead ended in one of the most chilling and perplexing mysteries of the 20th century. 9 young adventurers, all skilled and highly trained, set off into the mountains with high spirits and careful preparation. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, was an ambitious and disciplined 23-year-old engineering student determined to lead his team on a Category 3 expedition, the most difficult level of hiking certification in the Soviet Union. Their route would take them through Dyatlov Pass, an unnamed and untouched part of the Ural Range, where few had ventured before, but they never returned. Weeks later, after the group failed to report back, a search party was sent to find them. What rescuers discovered defied all logic. Their tent was found first, slashed open from the inside, as if they had fled in terror. Shoes, clothing, and supplies were left behind, abandoned in the freezing cold. Following a trail of footprints in the snow, searchers found the bodies of the hikers scattered across the mountainside. Some had died of hypothermia, but others had mysterious, brutal injuries, shattered skulls, broken ribs, one missing a tongue, and another missing both eyes. And strangest of all, some of their clothing was found to be radioactive. The investigation was rushed and inconclusive. Soviet officials quickly shut down inquiries, offering only vague explanations. The cause of death? An unknown compelling force. No further details were provided. The case was sealed for decades, fueling endless speculation about what truly happened on that frozen mountain. Over time, the Dyatlov Pass incident became more than just an unsolved mystery. It became a legend, a case that has baffled scientists, investigators, and conspiracy theorists alike. Some believe a sudden avalanche drove the hikers from their tent. Others claim secret Soviet military experiments or nuclear weapons testing played a role. More outlandish theories suggest UFOs, paranormal forces, or even a violent attack by a Yeti-like creature. Despite countless investigations, no single theory fully explains what happened that night. The mystery remains unsolved, and every attempt to uncover the truth has only deepened the enigma. To understand the Dyatlov Pass incident, we must go back to the beginning, to the hikers themselves, their carefully planned expedition, and the final moments before their fates were sealed beneath the ice and snow. 9 young men and women, each carefully selected for their skill, their endurance, and their experience in the wild. They were students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg, and they were no strangers to the dangers of extreme cold and high-altitude trekking. Each had trained rigorously for this moment, a journey that would push them to their limits, but one they were confident they could complete. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student and seasoned trekker. Intelligent, disciplined, and respected by his peers, Dyatlov was known for his meticulous planning and ability to keep a team together under harsh conditions. His goal was to lead the group through a Category 3 expedition, the most difficult level of hiking recognized by Soviet authorities. If they succeeded, they would all earn the prestigious certification, an achievement that could open doors to greater expeditions in the future. With him were 8 others, each with their own strengths, experiences, and reasons for taking on the challenge. Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22, was an energetic and strong-willed woman, one of the more experienced hikers in the group. She had previously completed difficult mountain expeditions and was known for her cheerful but determined nature. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, was once in a romantic relationship with Zinaida, though they had since separated. He was known for his fearlessness. Once, standing up to a bear on a previous expedition, waving a geologist's hammer to scare it away. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20, was one of the toughest members of the team. Despite her young age, she was an experienced trekker who had endured harsh conditions before. She was also known for her outspoken nature, never afraid to express her thoughts. Whether it was about the Soviet government or the people around her, Alexander Kolevatov, 24, was a physics student, deeply analytical and highly intelligent. His quiet demeanor masked a keen observational ability, and he had experience working in classified military facilities, a detail that would later fuel conspiracy theories about the group's fate. Rustem Slobodin, 23, was an athletic and highly disciplined hiker. He had trained in endurance sports, particularly long-distance running, which made him one of the strongest in the group. Nikolai Thibault Brignol, 23, came from a family with French heritage. He was a mechanical engineering student, known for his sense of humor and ability to keep morale high in even the harshest conditions. Semyon Zolotaryov, 38, was the oldest and most mysterious member of the team. Unlike the others, he was not a student at the institute, but a World War II veteran with extensive survival skills. No one knew why he had been added to the group at the last minute, and his presence would later become a focal point for speculation about what happened on the mountain. Yuri Yudin, 21, was the 10th member of the group, but fate would spare him from what lay ahead. Early in the expedition, he fell ill with severe joint pain, forcing him to turn back before reaching the most dangerous part of the journey. This twist of fate saved his life. For the rest of his years, he would live with the burden of wondering what had happened to his friends and why he had been the only one to survive. The group set out on January 23, 1959, full of energy and optimism. They traveled first by train to Ivdel, a town in the Ural Mountains where they spent the night, before continuing by truck to the remote village of Vijay, the last inhabited settlement before the vast, frozen wilderness. The villagers in Vijay were among the last people to see them alive. From there, the group set off on skis, following a carefully mapped route through the snowy forests and mountain ridges. They documented their journey with photographs and diary entries, describing their struggles with the cold, but also their excitement for the adventure ahead. Their entries reveal laughter, camaraderie, and confidence. There was no fear, no hint of the nightmare that awaited them. On January 28, Yuri Yudin made the painful decision to turn back due to illness. The others continued without him, skiing deeper into the wilderness, heading toward Kolat-Syakhl, the mountain where they would make their final camp. The name meant Dead Mountain in the language of the indigenous Mansi people. The team maintained a strict schedule, setting up camp each night, documenting their progress, and leaving behind notes for those who might retrace their steps. By February 1st, they had reached the eastern slope of Dyatlov Pass, the spot where they would spend their final night. At some point, after their last diary entry was written and their last photograph taken, something happened, something violent, something terrifying. Something that made 9 experienced hikers flee their tent in the dead of night into the freezing darkness, without shoes, without warm clothing, without any rational explanation. It would be weeks before their bodies were found, and when they were, the mystery of Dyatlov Pass would only deepen. By the evening of February 1st, 1959, the Dyatlov group had reached the eastern slopes of Kolat-Syakhl, the mountain they had intended to pass through before continuing their journey. They were ahead of schedule, but for reasons unknown, they chose to stop and set up camp on the exposed mountainside rather than descending to the nearby forest, which would have provided more shelter from the wind. Some researchers have speculated that Dyatlov, as a leader, wanted to challenge the group by camping in extreme conditions. Others believe the group simply lost daylight and had no choice but to settle where they were. despite the frigid conditions. The hikers appeared in good spirits. Photographs from their recovered cameras show them smiling, working together to set up camp and preparing for the night ahead. They were experienced, well-equipped, and had faced harsh conditions before. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Their last recorded diary entries reveal a sense of normalcy, even humor. In one passage, Lyudmila Dubinina joked about how everyone was exhausted from hiking in deep snow, but remained determined. Another entry reflected on the beauty of the landscape, describing the vast, empty whiteness of the mountains stretching endlessly before them. The group cooked dinner, shared stories, and settled into their tent for what they expected to be just another cold night in the mountains. But something happened in the hours that followed. At some point between midnight and dawn, the hikers, without warning and without proper clothing, fled their tent in sheer terror. When searchers found the campsite, weeks later, the tent was still standing, but it had been slashed open from the inside, as if they had desperately tried to escape something. Their boots, jackets, and supplies were left behind, even though stepping outside without protective clothing in negative 30-degree temperatures was a death sentence. Footprints in the snow, preserved in the freezing cold, told part of the story. The hikers appeared to have walked, not run, down the slope, moving toward the tree line nearly 5 kilometers away. Some were barefoot, others wore only socks. Their movements did not suggest a chase or an immediate attack, but rather a slow, confused evacuation, as if they had fled in fear, but not in panic. The first bodies were discovered near a tall cedar tree at the edge of the forest. Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonishenko were found dressed only in their underwear, their hands and feet covered in burns. Nearby, remnants of a small fire were found, as if they had desperately tried to keep warm. Broken branches up to 5 meters high suggested that one or both of them had tried to climb the tree, perhaps to get a better view of the tent or to escape something unseen. The next 3 bodies, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, were found scattered between the tent and the tree, lying in positions that suggested they had been trying to crawl back to camp before succumbing to the cold. But it was the last 4 bodies that deepened the mystery into something truly terrifying. 2 months later, when the snow had melted, the remaining hikers, Dubinina, Zolotaryov, Thibaut Brignol, and Kolevatov, were found in a ravine, partially buried under 4 meters of snow. Their injuries were horrific. Dubinina's tongue was missing. Thibaut Brignol had suffered a crushed skull. Zolotaryov and Dubinina both had multiple broken ribs, with trauma so severe it was compared to a high-speed car crash. Yet there were no external wounds. No cuts, no bruises, no marks indicating an attack by animals or weapons. Their injuries seemed to have been caused by a massive, unexplained force. Adding to the strangeness, radiation was found on some of their clothing, leading to wild speculation that they had encountered something far beyond normal human comprehension. The search team could not make sense of what they had found. There were no signs of an avalanche, no evidence of a struggle, no clear explanation for why the hikers had left their tent in such a frantic manner. With the bodies recovered and the scene thoroughly examined, Soviet authorities were left with one haunting question: what had driven 9 experienced hikers to flee into the frozen night, without shoes, without protection, and without any apparent signs of an immediate threat? The mystery of Dyatlov Pass had only begun. The hikers were supposed to return to Vizhai and send a telegram confirming the completion of their expedition by February 12, 1959. Their families, accustomed to the dangers of the wilderness, did not panic when the date passed. Delays in such extreme conditions were not uncommon. A few days might pass before a group emerged from the mountains, weather-beaten but victorious. But as the days turned into weeks, concern turned into fear. By February 20th, the Ural Polytechnic Institute, where most of the hikers were students, organized a search party. Local volunteers, including fellow hikers, skiers, and rescue workers, set out to retrace Dyatlov's planned route. When they found nothing, the Soviet military became involved, sending helicopters, search dogs, and soldiers into the vast expanse of the Ural Mountains. The search would take days, but when rescuers finally located the hikers' camp on February 26, what they found defied all logic. The tent was still standing, half buried in the snow, a silent monument to whatever had happened on the mountain. But something was wrong. The entrance was sealed shut from the outside, as if the hikers had never intended to leave. However, closer inspection revealed something disturbing. The fabric had been slashed open from the inside. The first responders stood in stunned silence. If there had been an avalanche, the tent would have been flattened. If there had been an animal attack, there would be signs of claw marks or blood. But this was different. It was as if the hikers had desperately cut their way out, escaping from something inside. Inside the tent, everything was strangely undisturbed. The group's boots, jackets, sleeping bags, food, and even a flask of alcohol remained neatly arranged. The hikers had fled without shoes, gloves, or warm clothing, running into the night with only thin layers of clothing, completely unprepared for the deadly cold. But why? Following footprints leading away from the camp, searchers found a bizarre scene. The prints, mostly barefoot or in socks, led in an orderly fashion down the slope, as if the hikers had not been running, but walking calmly but deliberately. The tracks extended 5 kilometers down toward the tree line, then disappeared into the snow. Then came the first body. Underneath a large cedar tree, the search team found the half-naked frozen remains of Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonishenko. Their hands and feet were covered in burns, and small traces of flesh were found in their mouths, suggesting they had bitten their own hands to stay awake or fight off the pain of frostbite. Nearby, a small fire had been built, but it had not been enough to save them. Above them, broken branches reached nearly 5 meters high, as if one or both men had tried to climb the tree in desperation. Were they trying to escape something? Were they looking back toward the tent, searching for their friends? The next 3 bodies were found frozen in the snow, between the cedar tree and the campsite. Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin were all facing the tent, as if they had been trying to crawl back to safety. Their causes of death: hypothermia, yet something still didn't add up. Slobodin's skull was fractured, but not in a way that would immediately kill him. His injuries suggested he had been hit in the head with blunt force, but had still attempted to make his way back to camp before freezing to death. At this point, rescuers assumed they had found the whole group, but 4 were still missing. For 2 more months, search teams scoured the snow-covered terrain, looking for the remaining hikers. It wasn't until May 4th, when the snow had begun to melt, that the final 4 bodies were discovered, and with them, a mystery that defied all logic. They were buried deep within a snow-covered ravine, nearly 4 meters beneath the surface. Unlike the others, these hikers had significant fatal injuries. Injuries that no avalanche, no animal, and no human should have been able to inflict. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had a fractured skull, so severe that experts later compared it to the impact of a car crash. Semyon Zolotaryov and Lyudmila Dubinina had multiple broken ribs, shattered as if they had been crushed by an immense force. Dubinina's tongue was missing as well as her eyes. Zolotaryov's eyes were also gone. Oddly, their bodies showed no external bruising or wounds, as if whatever had caused their fatal injuries had happened from the inside out. The medical examiner noted that the level of pressure required to break ribs this severely was greater than what a human could inflict. Then, there was another discovery that made no sense. Some of their clothing tested positive for radiation. Why was radiation present? Theories began to form almost immediately. Some suggested the group had been exposed to military weapons testing. Others believed they had stumbled upon a top-secret Soviet experiment, one that the government wanted to cover up. And then there were those who believed something even more sinister had occurred. Eyewitnesses from another hiking group, camping over 50 kilometers away, claimed they saw strange glowing lights in the sky on the night of February 1st. A glowing orange orb hovered over the Ural Mountains, disappearing without explanation. What had the Dyatlov group seen? What had made them slash open their tent in terror, flee into the night barefoot, and die under such strange circumstances? The Soviet authorities, now under pressure, closed the investigation quickly. Their official ruling: the hikers had died from an unknown compelling force. It was not a natural disaster, not an animal attack, and not exposure alone. It was something else, something the investigators either could not explain or did not want to explain. To this day, what truly happened on Dyatlov Pass remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in history. But the investigation, however incomplete, had already begun. And what the authorities found or chose not to disclose would only deepen the mystery even further. The Soviet authorities launched an official investigation into the Dyatlov Pass Incident almost immediately after the bodies were discovered. However, the handling of the case would raise more questions than answers, fueling speculation that the truth was being buried along with the victims. From the beginning, the circumstances surrounding the hikers' deaths did not fit into any conventional explanation. The search teams had found their abandoned tents slashed open from the inside, personal belongings left behind, and footprints leading away in an orderly fashion, rather than in the chaotic manner expected if they were fleeing for their lives. Some of the hikers had died from hypothermia, which seemed logical in the extreme cold, but others had suffered severe internal trauma comparable to injuries seen in high-speed crashes or explosions, yet without any external wounds. The first major inconsistency in the investigation was the location of the bodies. The fact that the last 4 hikers were found buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine suggested that something catastrophic had happened, but there was no evidence of an avalanche or a sudden collapse of snow that could explain the massive force required to break their bones. Adding to the confusion was the discovery of radiation on some of the hikers' clothing. The presence of radiation was so unusual that it raised immediate suspicions. Some investigators suggested that the group had unknowingly wandered into a military testing zone where radioactive weapons or materials had been used. This theory was supported by the glowing orange orbs reportedly seen in the sky on the night of February 1st by other hikers camping miles away. The official autopsies were performed quickly, but their findings did little to clarify what had happened. The cause of death for most of the hikers was listed as hypothermia, but for those with severe injuries, the report simply stated that they had been subjected to an extreme force, comparable to a car accident. No explanation was given for the missing eyes and tongue of Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov, nor was there any logical reasoning provided for why the hikers had cut their tent from the inside and fled without their shoes and jackets. The strangest part of the investigation, however, was how quickly the case was closed. Soviet authorities shut down any further inquiry and sealed the case files, restricting access to official documents for decades. No suspects were named, no further explanations were given, and the deaths of the 9 hikers were ultimately attributed to an unknown compelling force. At the time, the Soviet Union was known for its strict secrecy regarding military operations, and many believed that the government knew more than it was willing to admit. The possibility of classified military involvement was widely suspected, but without access to evidence, it was impossible to prove. As news of the Dyatlov Pass incident spread, speculation grew. Some suggested that the hikers had witnessed a top-secret weapons test and were killed to prevent them from revealing what they had seen. Others pointed to the strange burn marks on the bodies, the radiation, and the missing eyes and tongue, arguing that the hikers had been exposed to an experimental weapon, perhaps one that emitted high levels of energy or heat. Another bizarre detail emerged when researchers noticed that some of the recovered bodies had deep orange skin and gray hair, a phenomenon often associated with radiation poisoning. While some scientists argued that this could have been caused by natural decomposition in extreme cold, others believed that the hikers had been exposed to something highly toxic before they died. The military's unusual presence in the area also raised concerns. In the weeks following the discovery of the bodies, soldiers were seen conducting training exercises in the region, even though there was no official military base nearby. Survivors from the search teams later recalled seeing government officials examining the bodies in secrecy, refusing to share their findings with local authorities. Even more unsettling was the testimony of a separate group of hikers camping more than 50 kilometers away on the night of February 1st. They reported seeing strange glowing lights in the sky, hovering over the mountain for several minutes before disappearing. Some believed these could have been military flares or missile tests, while others speculated that they were something else entirely, UFOs, or some unknown phenomenon. As the Soviet government continued to suppress information, theories about what had really happened began to circulate widely. Some suspected that the hikers had been attacked by Mansi tribesmen, angered by the group's trespassing on sacred land. But this theory was dismissed early on. There were no signs of struggle, no additional footprints, and no evidence of an attack. Others believed that the hikers had been victims of a secret KGB mission gone wrong, or that they had unknowingly been exposed to a Soviet experiment involving infrasound, a low-frequency vibration that can cause panic, confusion, and hallucinations. By the time the official case files were declassified in the 1990s, researchers discovered that key evidence had gone missing, including early reports from investigators, key witness statements, and several pieces of recovered clothing. What was the Soviet government hiding? Why was the case shut down so quickly? And why did officials refuse to acknowledge the more bizarre aspects of the investigation? Despite the decades of secrecy, the Dyatlov Pass incident refused to fade from public memory. More than 60 years later, it remains one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century, an event where nothing made sense, yet everything pointed to something far beyond ordinary human understanding. The investigation may have been shut down, but theories about what truly happened have only continued to grow. Some believe that science will eventually provide an answer, that new discoveries in forensic technology and environmental studies may one day reveal what really happened to Igor Dyatlov and his team. Others are convinced that the truth will never be uncovered, that whatever happened on that frozen mountainside in 1959 was meant to remain a secret buried in the snow. What is undeniable is that 9 hikers ventured into the Ural Mountains that winter, fully prepared for the dangers of the wild. But nothing could have prepared them for what they encountered. The question remains, what drove them from their tent that night? And why did none of them survive to tell the tale? For more than 60 years, the Dyatlov Pass incident has remained one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in modern history. Despite the Soviet government's official conclusion that the hikers perished due to an unknown compelling force, researchers, investigators, and theorists have spent decades trying to piece together what really happened on that frozen mountainside in February 1959. Theories about the hikers' deaths range from scientific and rational explanations to the bizarre and otherworldly. While Some believe that natural forces played a role. Others are convinced that secret military experiments, government cover-ups, or even extraterrestrial involvement were behind the tragedy. One of the most widely accepted explanations is that the hikers were forced to flee their tent due to an avalanche. The theory suggests that a slab of snow broke loose from the slope, crashing onto the tent and forcing the group to cut their way out in panic. Once outside, in near total darkness and freezing temperatures, the hikers would have tried to move toward safety, ultimately succumbing to the cold before they could find shelter. The last 4 hikers, found months later in a snow-covered ravine, may have fallen into a deep crevasse or been crushed by additional snowfall, explaining their severe internal injuries. However, there are serious problems with this theory. No clear avalanche debris was found at the campsite, even during the initial search efforts. The footprints leading away from the tent were orderly, not rushed or chaotic, which would be expected if the group was running from an avalanche. The hiker's tent was still standing, which would have been unlikely if it had been buried by snow. The severe injuries of some victims did not match typical avalanche trauma, and the missing tongue and eyes of Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov remain unexplained. A 2021 study conducted by Swiss researchers used advanced snow simulations to suggest that a rare type of delayed slab avalanche could have struck the hikers while they were sleeping, forcing them to evacuate in a controlled manner before hypothermia took hold. While this explanation provides some answers, it still fails to account for the more bizarre details of the case. Another theory suggests that the hikers inadvertently stumbled upon a secret Soviet military test, possibly involving parachute, mines, sonic weapons, or radiation experiments. This theory gained traction due to the presence of radiation on some of the hikers' clothing, as well as eyewitness accounts of strange glowing lights in the sky on the night of the incident. The idea is that the group was caught in the middle of an undisclosed military test, and that their injuries, particularly the severe internal damage without external wounds, may have been caused by the shockwaves of an explosion rather than a physical attack or fall. Further evidence supporting this theory includes the rushed and secretive nature of the Soviet investigation, the discovery of military personnel in the area soon after the search teams arrived, reports of another group of hikers witnessing orange orbs hovering in the sky on the night of the incident, the missing tongue and eyes of some victims, which could indicate exposure to extreme heat or radiation. Critics argue that there was no evidence of explosions in the area, and the Soviet military never officially acknowledged any weapons testing near Dyatlov Pass. However, some researchers believe that classified files could still exist, hidden away in Soviet archives. Some scientists believe the hikers may have fallen victim to a rare natural phenomenon known as infrasound, low-frequency sound waves that are inaudible to humans but can induce panic, confusion, and paranoia. Certain wind conditions, particularly around mountain peaks, can create infrasound waves, which have been known to cause feelings of dread, nausea, and extreme discomfort. If such waves had swept through Dyatlov Pass that night, they could have triggered a mass panic among the hikers, causing them to flee their tent in a disoriented state. However, while this might explain why the group abandoned their shelter, so suddenly it does not account for the severe injuries sustained by some of the hikers. If infrasound had been the cause, the group would have eventually regained their senses and returned to the tent rather than wandering into the deadly cold. Some early theories suggested that the hikers may have angered the local Mansi people, an indigenous group native to the Ural Mountains. It was speculated that the hikers had trespassed on sacred land, leading to a violent retaliation. However, there is no evidence supporting this theory. No additional footprints were found near the campsite. The injuries did not match those of a typical attack with weapons. The Mansi people were known to be peaceful and cooperative with hikers in the region. The Soviet authorities quickly ruled out this possibility, and no Mansi individuals were ever charged or suspected in connection with the deaths. Perhaps the most controversial theories surrounding the Dyatlov Pass incident involve UFOs, Yeti, attacks, or other unexplained paranormal forces. Some believe the strange glowing lights seen in the sky were extraterrestrial in origin, suggesting the hikers may have been exposed to radiation or a form of energy beyond human understanding. Others claim that the missing tongue and eyes were the result of a government experiment gone wrong, or something far more sinister. A few even argue that the hikers were attacked by a yet-to-be-discovered creature, possibly a Yeti-like cryptid, forcing them to flee their tent in terror. While no evidence exists to support paranormal explanations, the bizarre nature of the injuries and the lack of a clear, definitive cause have left room for wild speculation. Some investigators believe that no single event caused the Dyatlov Pass tragedy, but rather a series of compounding factors: harsh weather, confusion, exhaustion, and poor decision-making. If one or more hikers became disoriented in the night, their panic could have spread to the rest of the group, causing them to flee without thinking. The burn marks on Doroshenko and Krivonishenko may have been from their desperate attempt to keep warm by a fire, not from an external force. The crushed skull and broken ribs of other hikers may have been caused by a fall into the ravine, rather than an unknown attacker. While this theory is the most rational, it still does not explain why experienced hikers would flee their tent in an orderly manner without shoes or warm clothing, or why radiation was present on their clothing. The unanswered questions, despite extensive research, no single theory fully explains all the details of what happened that night. Why did the hikers cut their tent open from the inside? What made them flee without proper clothing? How did some sustain massive internal injuries while others had no visible wounds? Why were traces of radiation found on their clothing? What were the glowing lights seen in the sky that night? More than 60 years later, the mystery of Dyatlov Pass remains unsolved. The truth, whether natural, military, or something beyond, human comprehension may never be fully known. One thing is certain: 9 young hikers ventured into the Ural Mountains that winter. None of them returned. And what they encountered on that mountain remains one of the most haunting, unsolved mysteries in history. More than 60 years after the Dyatlov Pass incident, the mystery still refuses to fade into history. Unlike many unsolved cases that grow distant with time, the deaths of Igor Dyatlov and his group continue to fuel debates, research, and speculation. The case has been the subject of countless books, documentaries, and scientific studies, yet the fundamental questions remain unanswered. Why did 9 experienced hikers, familiar with extreme cold and trained for survival, flee their tent barefoot into the snow, only to die under bizarre and unexplained circumstances? And why, despite decades of investigation, forensic advancements, and government reports, has no single explanation been able to account for all the strange details of the case? For those who believe in scientific reasoning, the Dyatlov Pass incident is a puzzle of natural forces and human error. The harsh weather, the possibility of a small avalanche or katabatic winds, and the disorientation caused by hypothermia might explain some aspects of the hikers' deaths. However, these explanations fail to address the severe injuries found on some victims, the radiation traces on their clothing, and the missing body parts of Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov. The question is not just how they died, but what made them flee into the freezing night in the first place. For others, the case remains one of history's greatest cover-ups. The Soviet government's handling of the investigation was suspicious at best, sealing records, restricting access to case files, and shutting down all further inquiries after concluding that the hikers were killed by an unknown compelling force. The presence of radiation reports of military activity in the region and eyewitness accounts of strange lights in the sky have only strengthened the belief that the hikers may have stumbled upon something they were never meant to. See, perhaps a classified weapons test, an experimental military operation, or even a nuclear accident. Still, others believe that the Dyatlov Pass tragedy is more than just a scientific anomaly or a government conspiracy. Some suggest that the area itself is cursed, a theory rooted in the local Mansi legends that refer to Kholat Shakal as the Mountain of the Dead. Some claim that the hikers' deaths align with supernatural phenomena, pointing to paranormal forces, UFO encounters, or something even more unexplainable. The site of the tragedy, now officially known as Dyatlov Pass, has become a destination for hikers, researchers, and conspiracy theorists alike. Every year, adventurers retrace the group's final steps, hoping to uncover new clues or simply to experience the eerie solitude of the Ural Mountains. Some visitors report strange sensations, sudden feelings of dread, or unexplained malfunctions in their equipment, stories that only add to the legend. In recent years, new investigations have attempted to finally solve the mystery. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case, citing advancements in forensic science that might shed new light on the hikers' deaths. A 2021 study suggested that a rare delayed slab avalanche, one triggered hours after the hikers set up camp, could explain why they suddenly fled their tent. The theory, supported by computer modeling and data from military tests, argues that a sudden shift in the snowpack created a small, localized avalanche that buried part of their tent, forcing them to escape into the cold before their shelter collapsed completely. But while this theory provides a plausible reason for the hikers' panic, it does not explain the severe injuries found on the last 4 victims, the radiation traces, or the missing body parts. Critics argue that an avalanche should have left more obvious signs in the snow, and that none of the search teams initially reported any such evidence. Even with modern forensic tools, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains frustratingly unsolved. The mystery endures not only because of the strange details surrounding the case, but also because it touches on something deeper: our fear of the unknown. Whether it was a natural disaster, a military experiment, or something beyond human understanding, the deaths of Igor Dyatlov and his group serve as a chilling reminder that even in the modern world, some mysteries remain untouched, lost in the vast and merciless wilderness. For the families of the victims, theories are not enough. The parents, siblings, and loved ones of the hikers spent decades searching for answers, only to be met with secrecy, dead ends, and contradictions. The last surviving member of the group, Yuri Yudin, who had fallen ill and turned back before reaching Dyatlov Pass, lived with a lifetime of unanswered questions. Until his death in 2013, he remained convinced that his friends had been victims of a cover-up, that the truth had been buried along with them in the frozen depths of the Ural Mountains. Perhaps one day, advancements in forensic science, declassified Soviet documents, or a new piece of evidence will finally uncover what happened on that cold, silent night in February 1959. But until then, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of history's most haunting, perplexing, and terrifying unsolved cases. What drove 9 experienced hikers to flee into the darkness, without shoes or warm clothing, into temperatures that guaranteed death? What crushed their bones and left them scattered across the mountain, as if some unseen force had pursued them to their final moments? And why, after more than 60 years, do the mountains refuse to give up their secrets? The truth, whatever it may be, remains buried beneath the snow. Epilogue: the silence of the mountains. The Ural Mountains remain as they always have, silent, unforgiving, and unyielding. The wind still howls across the frozen expanse, whispering through the trees and sweeping over the place where 9 young hikers met their fate. Their footprints have long since vanished, buried beneath decades of snowfall. Their tent, their belongings, and their final moments, all lost to time. But their story refuses to be forgotten. Year after year, researchers, adventurers, and conspiracy theorists return to Dyatlov Pass, drawn to its mystery, hoping to uncover what truly happened that night in February 1959. Some search for scientific explanations, an elusive answer buried in physics, climate patterns, and forensic science. Others believe the truth was deliberately hidden, locked away in Soviet archives or erased from history. And then there are those who think the answer lies beyond what we can comprehend, a force unknown to man, something that cannot be measured, cannot be explained, and cannot be found. Perhaps the real answer will never come. Perhaps it was never meant to. The hikers set out on their journey with certainty, with skill, with experience. They knew the dangers of the cold, the weight of survival, and the discipline required to make it home. But something awaited them on that frozen slope of Kolatsiakl, something they could not prepare for, something that drove them from the safety of their tent and into the darkness with no chance of escape. No one lived to tell the story. What is certain is that 9 lives ended that night, swallowed by the mountain. But the questions they left behind linger in the wind, drifting across the snow-covered pass where their bodies were found, where their final breaths froze in the night air. And as long as the mountains stand, as long as winter continues to cover the Ural wilderness in endless white, those questions will remain, unanswered, unsolved, and waiting. The Dyatlov Pass Incident is more than a mystery. It is a reminder that some places in this world still belong to the unknown.